Teachers, professors of Reddit, how did you secretly get back at that kid? I had a letter mailed to my office, as in paid postage etc. that was basically threatening me, saying I better stop handing out C's and D's or word on the street was going to be that I was a bad teacher and no one would take my class and I'd be out of a job. I had a pretty good idea of who it was, obviously immediately ruled out all the students doing well in my classes, but didn't think direct accusations would be really effective anyway. I decided to take it to each of my 3 classes and turn it into a lesson on faulty rhetoric. My expectations were exceeded when I began to read the letter out loud, and without fail each class erupted in laughter and exclaimed things like "what" and "butthole" before I could even weigh in. The kid I suspected the most definitely sat slumped in his chair without much to say that day. I hope you read it in a gangster, Mafia Al Capone voice. My friend was a professor for years. He told me this one last year. A group of lousy, talkative students started acing the weekly tests in the seminar periods. We're talking marginally passing to a sudden spike of consistent 100% S. He figured out that they had a friend who was in an earlier seminar period in the week feeding them the questions before they took it themselves. He emailed them, and instead of busting them, asked them to teach the whole class on their newfound study habits. He made them all stand in front of the class and teach how they study. The whole lesson was a load of crap, and was plainly visible to everyone. Then for the next test, he rotated the questions for their seminar time. The whole group got 0/10 across the board. He emailed them again and plainly said, "Guess those study habits need some tweaking, hun?" One time there was this girl sleeping in my calculus class. Well, my teacher walked over to his desk phone and says to the rest of the class, "Did you guys hear that ring?" He proceeds to pick up the phone, nod his head and hang up. He wakes the girl up and tells her she's needed in the main office, so she leaves. The entire class is super confused. 10 minutes later she returns and is like, "They didn't need me at the office." He says, "I know, but I hope that walk woke you up." Another time, he was handing out a quiz that was an example AP calculus problem. He ran out of quizzes early, which usually meant we could work in groups on the quiz. He then says, "But you know, Newton always had a trick up his sleeve." He unbuttons his sleeve and pulls out more quizzes. That teacher had tricks. A lot of the guys in my high school would dip during school, chewing tobacco. Most of the teachers would just roll their eyes, tell them to spit it out, and confiscate the rest. A couple teachers that were known for punishing teens who were dipping and would go as far as suspending them for it. One of those teachers enjoyed fricking with her students. If she realized you were dipping, she'd give you an out. You could either admit to dipping and get sent to the office for disciplinary action, or you could drink from the spit bottle that you were pretending was a Coke. I saw too many classmates try to avoid punishment by taking a big swig, only to rush off to the bathroom to vomit. Can't say they didn't know the risk before they walked in though. I had a teacher that threatened something similar. If you were caught chewing bubblegum, you had to spit it into an old lunchbox he kept on a shelf, and then take out a random old piece of bubblegum and chew it for the rest of the class. Only saw it happen once though. There was a kid in my class who always was cheating on my tests and quizzes. I caught him several times and contacted the parents, but nothing was ever really done about it, aside from the fact that he got zeros if I caught him. I don't think his mom ever really believed he was cheating as much as he was, and there were plenty of times I probably didn't catch him. Once on the midterm, he missed the test. He came back the day I gave the kid their scores back, which also had the answers, but not the questions. I saw him sneakily talking to his friends and they gave him their papers that had the answers on them. I didn't say anything, but the makeup midterm has the same questions with all of the answer choices moved over by one letter. Little bastard got a 3% on a multiple choice midterm. I assume he must have read one question and then copied the rest from his friends. Justice. This was kind of a common thing for multiple choice tests for me growing up. The teacher would print off 2 or 3 copies of the same test just with the order of the questions mixed up. Not secretly, but I learned to take copious notes and have a file on every student. Lazy students will often try to throw the blame on the teacher. I had 2 students request a meeting with the dean of students to discuss my unfair grading, and I showed up with a stack of evidence. Every substantive in-person interaction was documented on the front of the file, and I included copies of every email and note on the inside. There's nothing more embarrassing than coming face to face with your own laziness and being unable to wriggle free. They started paying attention after that. My boss always says that the team with the better documentation always wins. Bravo. Let them fail. I had a student that no matter how many conversations I had with her counselor, with her parent, etc., she refused to do assignments or turn anything in. She was of the opinion that my class was throwaway, an easy A, so I'll let her fail. I stopped reaching out to her for the last 6 weeks and let her build her own gallows for her GPA. She came to me half panicked 2 days before the final, begging for extra credit, anything, number, but I'll fail. Yeah, you will. The real world works like this. You don't do what's required of you, you fail. I tried to help but you never cared. I can't have an F. That's really not my problem at this point. Take it up with the principal, kid. Letting stupid and lazy kids fail is the best approach. My stats professor said he saw a group of really talkative and distracting kids doing well, and he thought it was fishy. He looked at the tests and saw that they were all the same answers. Then he looked at the seating chart and noticed that they could all look over each other's shoulders to the front of the class where the smart, quiet girl sat. Solution: give her a different test. Only her. When he handed back the tests, he told everyone who got under a certain grade, like a 50%, to come see him. Each student got like a 10% or something. When they were alone, he basically said, well, this is your punishment for cheating. Don't do it again. I thought that was awesome. My abnormal psych, a 400 level class, so you would assume people in this class were interested in the field, had us visit a local homeless shelter. This was an accelerated night class, so classes were 4 hours long. She arranged for us to go during our normal class time. A few people in the class felt it was dumb or a waste of time and bailed just as the tour was starting. The final exam for that class was about 4 questions that were very easy to answer if you stayed for the whole tour and absolutely impossible if you did not. High school teacher here. Had a little crap of a kid we'll call Anthony. Complained about everything. Did no work whatsoever. Talked crap about everyone. Made fun of kids with disabilities. You name it. And, of course, he was always the first to start shrieking that he was the victim in every situation. Everyone was against him, how come he always got picked on, and so forth. Now, in my teaching career, which has spanned the better part of a decade so far, I've taught more than 1,000 kids. Plenty of those have been bad kids. The thing about bad kids, though, is they're usually bad for fairly simple reasons. Crap going on at home, unmedicated or undiagnosed mental illness, trauma in their past, heck, maybe just lonely. If you pay attention, you can find out why almost any kid is acting out. That said, out of 1,000 plus kids, I've encountered maybe 10 who are genuinely broken people. You could call them sociopaths. No trace of empathy, no trace of conscience or even inner life. People who basically exist to serve their own desires, exclusively, and have no compunctions about how they might most quickly realize those desires. Anthony was one of those kids. The worst thing about him was his constant tendency to immediately crap upon anything that anyone else had put effort into, including my lessons. We would nearly have these very vulnerable, tender moments in the classroom, where kids were talking about big, important issues and really growing intellectually in awesome and uncomfortable ways. And then Anthony would call them freaking gay or whatever else. One day, this girl Patrice, an incredibly sweet girl, sensitive, with an artist's heart, is sharing something in class for the first time. Visibly nervous, shaky voice. Anthony, of course, begins making fun of her hair, her glasses, her face. Loud enough that it's plausibly a whisper, but loud enough so that we can all hear what he's saying. I start walking toward his desk but I'm interrupted when Patrice very calmly says, "Frick you, Anthony." The entire class was dead silent. This girl never spoke, let alone swore, and she said it with such self-control. Everyone's eyes are on me, waiting for me to react. Anthony starts screaming, "Did you hear that? She said frick. You always get me in trouble when I say frick. This crap ain't fair. How this ugly beginner." I say, "Huh, I didn't hear anything." Turn back around and continue the lesson. A few kids cheered. It felt really good. These 2 girls in my econ class were cheating all the time. They turned in this paper on the Federal Reserve that didn't get picked up with the plagiarism checker, but they both turned in the exact same paper as each other. I told them, you guys did a great job on this paper. You get 50% and you get 50%. In retrospect, I shouldn't have done it in front of the class. I have taught physics at the college level, and my experience was that kids would inevitably fail. It turns out someone who brazenly copies their homework doesn't learn enough to pass the exams, for example. So hey, no need to plan revenge. They would do it to themselves. This works until they give you bad evaluations because you didn't just give them a good grade for just showing up. However, what you said is why I don't both cracking down on people copying homework assignments. Technically, that's an academic honor code violation and they can get in all sorts of trouble for it, but it's not worth my effort when they're just screwing over themselves. Not a teacher, but I'll share my teacher story. In high school, I had a locker sandwiched in between a classroom and a wildly obnoxious butthole's locker. He would always swing door all the way out, meaning that I couldn't get into mine, then get really pissed off and annoyed when I moved his door to get into mine. If I asked him to do it, he'd laugh and scoff at me. The teacher, on the other hand, was a dream. Hippie all the way. I'm pretty sure she smoked pot on her off time, always smiling and dang good with kids. She would stand at her door and watch him do this, and knew that I resented this kid, and I'm pretty sure she did too. So skip to the end of the year. We're doing a final paper that's worth 60% of the grade. She takes the class down to the computer lab and gives everyone time to finish their papers if they haven't already. I had already done mine, so I was sitting around reading, when she comes up, taps on my shoulder, and points at butthole student, and tells me, giggling, "Hey, look at Quentin. He's copying his paper. I'm gonna give him an E," and walks away. This one wasn't directed at one kid, but it has the same kind of idea. It was senior ditch day and I asked my dad if I could stay home. He said heck no, go to school, so I did. Of course my senior English class is empty. Only like 5 kids showed out of a class of 30 plus. So my teacher says alright. Since I figured no one was showing up today, I scheduled a pop quiz. I'm thinking, crap, could this day get any worse? I'm here having to take a quiz while all my friends are freaking around at the beach. I get the quiz and the first question reads, what is another name for soda? What the frick? The next one says, goes the weasel. It was literally a pop quiz. It was the weirdest school exam I've ever taken. I'm laughing way too hard at this. OMFG. Your teacher is a god. It seems to me the best way to get back at college kids is to not curve their grades or bump them up. I just follow everything by the book. Student story. I was in a university history class where we had to make a presentation. One girl who had been obnoxious all semester gave a presentation that was suspiciously articulate despite her previous behavior. The professor stopped her in the middle of it and said, now you're going to continue reading that essay, but I know you didn't write it, because it was written by my friend Doctor. I expect you to make a new presentation for next week, but read us the rest of the essay please. She was stunned, and luckily somehow didn't get kicked out of school, but unfortunately I don't think her conduct changed. My favorite English teacher once led a discussion about Vietnam War novel, the things they carried into a discussion about drugs and paranoia in order to frick with the dude that always showed up to class high. She didn't look at him once, just kept saying stuff to frick with him, while, might I add, actually leading a very interesting conversation about drug abuse in Vietnam. I was sitting across the room from him and he looked like he was dying. When I was in high school, I was a librarian assistant at the elementary school that my mom taught at. There was this one little jerk who was always bullying this kid who was a little heavier set about his weight. I would always tell him to stop and he would for a bit, but the next day he would carry on. One day I finally had enough and told him that he needed to go to the principal's office, and he responded with something along the lines of, I don't need to listen to you. I'm strong. And then I knew that I needed to do something else. So I told him that since he is so strong that for the rest of the class period, about 30 minutes, that he would have to stand in the middle of the room with his arms stretched out. Let me just say that it is more difficult than it sounds. He took it as a challenge and walked his stupid smug face to the middle of the library and started holding his arms out. It didn't even take a minute for him to start lowering them. and I would turn to him and say, "Yeah, you must be really strong," sarcastically, and he would lift them back up. About 5 minutes had passed and then my mom walked into the library to see what was up. My mom and I chatted for a second and then she noticed the turd face standing in the middle of the room and asked what he was doing. The kid's face went red immediately. I told my mom that he was bullying other students and was disrespectful. Turns out that my mom was this kid's favorite teacher and he had no idea that I was her daughter. He ran and started crying into my mom's skirt and apologized, but my mom still took him to the principal. The rest of the year he was a little goddamn angel. Looking back, I don't think I went about it in a good way, but I was 17 and had no tolerance for bullies since I was bullied a good bit in elementary, junior high. I guess things worked out in the end. Public shaming is frowned upon a bit in Western culture, but goddamn does it work wonders. I used to teach high school English and theater. My students weren't terrible. They were teenagers. I ended up getting a reputation of being able to work with and get results from problem students, so I ended up getting a lot of problem students shoveled into my class. I rolled with it as best I could, not realizing this was the result of being a newer teacher in a small town high school and being on the bottom of the totem pole. I never felt the need to get back any of my students. They would either work hard or fail themselves. I've had a few come up to me years later and apologizing for how they were in my class and are doing better now in something they are interested in, because God forbid not every student is stoked about English class. The teachers and administrators on the other hand, oh man, worse than the kids, way worse. This was my first job out of college, so this was my first eye-opening to the professional world. I can't say that I have any stories of getting back at them either, because once I knew I needed to get out, I got out. But what I can say is that in my final semester my classroom of that kid scored better on state tests than the honors classes. That'll show 'em. I do sometimes run into former students and, a few times, former co-workers in my new job. But as a criminal defense attorney, you get to see plenty of people in their darkest days. Not me, but this happened to my friends. Our bonus project in physics was making an egg mobile, a vehicle designed to move an egg using only the power of an elastic band. The mark you got for this project would replace the lowest test score you got on the unit tests during the year. Two of my friends worked together on one. One friend was average student, while the other friend was fairly smart, but pushy and argumentative, a real Steve Jobs type. They constructed their egg mobile out of Lego, and it did work. However, the physics teacher was a little tired of friend number 2 at this point of the year. The mark he gave was enough to give student 1 a nice boost. However, it was 1 point lower than student 2's lowest test score. We had the same project in school with the aim being to get the egg as far as possible, but our teacher failed to mention that the egg needed to survive the journey. After several kids making spectacular cars from Technics and Lego etc, I rocked up with my trebuchet egg and smashed all previous records. Over the course of 2.5 weeks I slowed down his mouse's tracking speed until it was at the lowest setting. He was getting so aggravated and I just said, "Sorry, but we have a full class and there aren't any extra mice." Then I flipped it to full speed tracking the day we had all the students clean their keyboards and mice. I taught a TCP/IP networking course at a university. The assignment was to write a simple client and server in C, circa 1992. They had to submit their code and I compiled it and tested it. One submission had an error in a certain case, so I fixed the error to see if the rest of the cases worked. I graded the submission at 90% for something due to the one minor problem. Marking another student submission, I find the exact same error, exact same variable names. I run the two submissions through Unix diff command and the only difference was the student name in the comment at the top. I gave both students 45%. One complained. I told him the submission deserved a 90 but someone copied the work. Tell me who the real author is and I'll give them 90. The other gets 0 and reported. They both accepted the 45s. Nice application of the prisoner's dilemma. I taught English at a ritzy private school in South Korea. We weren't allowed to discipline the kids for any reason, no matter what, because the school was making money from the tuition. For the most part the kids, grade 5-6, were pretty good, but there was this one kid. He was a little crap about everything, always disruptive, bullying the other kids, throwing pencils, writing swear words in Korean on the whiteboard before class, never listening, etc. I started eating a lot of kimchi on the days I taught that specific class, which gave me wicked indigestion. When I walked by the kid I would let out these horrible silent creeping hot farts. No one ever blames the teacher, and after a couple weeks he became known as the farty kid. He was still a little crap, but it made me feel better knowing that he was knocked down a few pegs. Another disciple of the fart of war. Nice job on giving that kid a crappy reputation. Had a terrible student who was obnoxious and disruptive. He had no respect for anyone, including his classmates. I gave him a class participation grade that was just low enough to have him fail the class twice. He tried to appeal it, but it wasn't appealable. He changed majors and the professors in his new major hate him too. My class participation grade should really be called the don't be a fudgeted grade. I make sure I get to know them and include their interests in my study materials. They either get more motivated to learn in my classes, meaning we both win, or I kill part of their love for their hobby, making them spend less time playing MMOs through the night, meaning the student wins. I somehow don't think this is the juicy story the OP wanted. Joke's on you. I play at EVE Online, which already includes business industry, diplomacy and large-scale group tactics. Heck, studies have been done on the in-game market since it is so good at emulating the real-world market. I went out of my way to treat him perfectly fair and always addressed him formally. This made it crystal clear to everyone from classmates to other professors that he was the cause of his own terrible performance. The way I got back at that kid is tricking him into believing he's just playing and getting away with things, while he actually learned without knowing that he was actually learning. Booyah. Haha, that idiot is gonna keep that knowledge with him for the rest of his life. Playing the long game here. My high school trigonometry teacher got back at me for cheating on a test by making me come in for office hours, which basically meant I had to do all of his menial, boring tasks like filing papers and grading quizzes. Then, every test after that he watched me like a hawk, so it was really awkward taking my tests after that. But while he was so focused on you, everyone else in the class had ample times to cheat. You took one for the team. I was a somewhat hyperactive second grader at a Catholic school in Tennessee. Our teacher was a nun who didn't exactly have much patience with children. I was tied to my desk on more than one occasion due to not staying in my seat. She also enjoyed creative torturous punishment. The worst that I can remember was that she made one of my classmates stay in for recess and instead forced him to eat an entire peanut butter sandwich. This doesn't sound that bad, but it was common knowledge that peanut butter made this particular student violently ill. We came in after recess and he was sitting there dry heaving by a garbage can and his eyes were bloodshot. She was a special kind of evil. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.